Imagine walking into a giant European car factory. Rows of assembly robots frozen mid-air, conveyor belts motionless, workers leaning on railings with nothing to do. No strike, no power outage, no pandemic, just silence. The reason? A few tiny metals that almost no one ever thinks about, rare earth elements. These materials, with names like neodymium and dysprosium, are the secret ingredients behind the motors, sensors, and batteries that make electric vehicles run. Without them, even the most advanced machines can't move an inch. In early 2025, factories belonging to Europe's biggest car makers, Volkswagen, BMW, and Stellantis, suddenly ran out of these metals. Some production lines stopped completely. Workers stood around chatting to pass the time while managers scrambled for solutions. The entire European auto industry was on the verge of a standstill. Why? Because China, the world's main source of rare earths, had quietly tightened the tap. Export licenses slowed to a crawl, and shipments piled up at Chinese ports. For countries that had spent the last few years sanctioning Beijing or criticizing its trade practices, approval times stretched endlessly. Almost overnight, Europe realized that its entire clean energy dream, its electric cars, its green transition, its 2035 ban on fuel engines, depended on a handful of elements that China controlled. The once powerful car giants suddenly looked helpless, waiting for paperwork to clear thousands of miles away. And that's where today's story begins, how one decision in Beijing sent shockwaves through Europe's factories, boardrooms, and governments. To understand what triggered this crisis, we need to look at what China did. And why. In 2025, Beijing made a bold and calculated move. It officially added rare earth refining technology to its export control list and restricted the export of 7 major rare earth materials. On paper, it looked like just another trade policy. But in reality, it was a masterstroke of economic strategy, one that shook global industries to the core. So what exactly are rare earths? Despite the name, they're not really rare. What makes them special is how difficult and costly they are to mine and refine. They're buried deep underground, mixed with other minerals, and the refining process is highly complex and environmentally demanding. China, after decades of investment, became the only country that could do it efficiently, cheaply, and at scale. By controlling these materials, China effectively controls the backbone of modern technology. Electric cars, smartphones, fighter jets, wind turbines all depend on rare earths for their magnets, motors, and sensors. Without them, production literally stops. Now, here's where it gets interesting. China's restriction wasn't random, it was selective. Friendly countries that maintained good relations with Beijing still got fast approval for imports. But nations that often sanction or criticize China suddenly found their applications delayed, rechecked, or ignored entirely. This move sent a clear message. If you treat China like an enemy, don't expect business as usual. Beijing framed the policy as a matter of national security and environmental responsibility, but everyone could see the deeper layer. It was economic leverage. For years, Western countries had used sanctions as a weapon. Now China was showing it had a weapon of its own. One made not of missiles, but minerals. This new rule didn't just change trade flows, it redrew the global balance of power. And Europe, heavily dependent on Chinese rare earths for its electric vehicle industry, would soon feel the consequences more painfully than anyone else. The impact was immediate and brutal. Across Europe, assembly lines that had been running non-stop for years began to fall silent. At Stellantis, one of the continent's biggest automakers, production lines in several plants had to shut down because they simply couldn't get enough rare earth magnets. These magnets are tiny, but they're what power the motors that make electric vehicles move. Without them, even the most advanced machines are useless. Inside the factories, the scene was surreal. Workers stood around chatting or scrolling on their phones because there was nothing else to do. Management sent urgent messages up the chain. Suppliers made desperate phone calls to Asia, and logistics teams checked every possible route. But the answer was always the same: no shipment until China approves it. And Stellantis wasn't alone. Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Bosch all faced similar shortages. Europe's proud car industry, worth hundreds of billions of euros, was suddenly paralyzed by a few missing metals. The European Union panicked. 2 weeks later, Brussels sent an emergency ultimatum to Beijing. It demanded that China prioritize Europe with 100,000 tons of rare earths within 30 days to prevent a full-blown industrial collapse. It was a dramatic plea, the kind of message you send when the house is already on fire. At the same time, Stellantis tried a more creative route. The company pointed to its factory in Serbia, a nation with strong ties to China, and asked if that connection could open a friendly channel for faster approval. Beijing's reply was diplomatic, but sharp. China's export restrictions weren't aimed at friendly countries like Serbia. The message was clear: nations that maintain mutual respect get cooperation, but those that constantly oppose China's interests will have to wait. Within weeks, Europe's entire auto supply chain began to wobble. Production slowed, deadlines were missed, costs rose, and as executives scrambled to find a solution, one uncomfortable truth became undeniable. Europe's green future depended on the very country it had tried to contain. To understand why China decided to tighten its grip on rare earth exports, we have to rewind a bit, to the trade wars that set this whole chain reaction in motion. Back in 2024, Chinese electric vehicles were conquering the world. Companies like BYD, NIO, and Geely were selling millions of cars overseas, while China exported over 1.2 million new energy vehicles that year alone. The West saw this as a wake-up call, or rather, a threat. The United States was the first to strike. In May 2024, Washington raised tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles from 25% to a staggering 100%. A direct wall blocking Chinese automakers from the U.S. market. Then it went further. The U.S. Department of Commerce proposed banning the import of any connected vehicle technology containing Chinese hardware or software. That meant even car parts, sensors, and batteries tied to Chinese supply chains could be blacklisted. Europe soon followed. In July 2024, the European Commission launched an anti-subsidy investigation into Chinese electric vehicles, accusing them of unfair government support. Temporary tariffs ranging from 17% to 37% were imposed for 4 months. Then, just 3 months later, the EU decided to go all in, announcing tariffs as high as 80% to 100% on Chinese electric vehicles for the next 5 years. It was a coordinated effort, the US and EU acting almost in unison to slow down China's momentum in the EV race. Many Western analysts believed this would cripple China's auto industry. But the result was the exact opposite. In April 2025, Chinese automaker BYD made history. Its sales in Europe surged to 7,231 units, surpassing Tesla's 7,165 for the first time ever. China's share of the global EV market hit 67.7%, meaning 2 out of every 3 electric cars sold worldwide were Chinese-made. This victory shocked the West. Their tariffs hadn't stopped China. They had only pushed Beijing to become even more self-reliant and more determined. So when China later restricted rare earth exports, many saw it as a response, a quiet but powerful way of saying, "You can block our cars, but can you build yours without our materials?" The West's attempt to contain China had backfired, and now Europe was learning that trade wars don't just hurt your opponent, they can expose your own weaknesses. When the crisis hit, many European leaders comforted themselves with one idea. If China won't sell, we'll just find another source. But the harsh truth is, there is no other China when it comes to rare earths. On paper, Europe had already tried to prepare for this moment. The European Union once announced a €1.7 billion investment to develop local rare earth projects. German automakers began cooperating with Australian mining companies to secure new supply chains. There were even talks of exploring rare earth deposits in Romania, but when engineers went on site, they discovered how unrealistic these plans were. The Romanian mines had very limited reserves, and the mining cost was 3 times higher than China's. On top of that, Europe lacked a full chemical and metallurgical ecosystem, the kind you need to process these materials safely and efficiently. It's not just about digging minerals out of the ground, it's about refining them through a long, complex, and expensive process. Building that kind of system from scratch would take 5 to 10 years, and billions more in funding. Meanwhile, China already has everything in place, from raw mining to refining to the production of high-end magnets used in electric motors. Here's the scale of China's dominance. It controls about 87% of the world's rare earth processing capacity and 91% of refining. That means nearly every rare earth magnet inside a European or American electric vehicle probably passed through a Chinese factory at some stage. So while European politicians talk about strategic independence, the industry reality says otherwise. Europe is locked into a system it can't easily escape. Every attempt to build an alternative supply chain ends up being slower, costlier, and less efficient. Even when the European Commission announced a goal in March 2025 to boost local rare earth production 5-fold by 2030, experts quietly admitted it was too little, too late. The more Europe tried to break free, the more it realized how deeply it depended on China's decades of groundwork. And now that Beijing had turned the tap, the EU found itself in a position no economic superpower ever wants to be in, waiting in line, asking politely for permission,